Senator from Oregon.
I ask unanimous consent to grant floor privileges to my interns for their shadow days on the following dates: Michael O'Rourke on April 8th, 2025, G. Reichel on April 9th, Laney Chi on April 10th, Langston Fan on April 29th, and Kaylee Lawson on May 1st.
Without objection.
And Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent to use a visual aid.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Families lose, billionaires win. That's the Republican plan. Republican plan slashes $2 trillion from the programs families depend on to thrive in order to give more tax giveaways to the very richest Americans. Families lose $2 trillion in core programs slashed to deliver another $2 trillion to the richest Americans. That's a terrible plan. How about families thrive? How about billionaires pay their fair share? Now there's a good plan we ought to be all able to get behind. But there's even more that's wrong with this Republican plan. We found out yesterday a new estimate of the cost of their plan in new debt over the next 10 years, $7 trillion. That's trillion with a T. $1 trillion. Unpaid for tax cuts, with most of it going to the richest Americans. But there's even more bad news, because they want to extend that deficit debt-creating machine into the future, and CBO tells us that that will cost $37 trillion at a minimum in new debt. $37 trillion. Well, that's awfully hard to get your hands around. $37 trillion in new debt. But there's even more bad news. They want to tell the American public their plan produces no new debt. They have this new version of the world in which they simply wave away the debt and say, pretend it didn't exist. It's called magic math. And it works like this. You sign a lease for a house. You're going to rent a house for a year, costs $2,000 a month. It costs $24,000 a year. And at the end of the lease, you decide to renew it, but you tell your spouse, hey, honey, it doesn't cost an additional dime. Well, that's what my Republican colleagues are doing. They are establishing not just new tax giveaways, but they are extending, creating law that renews the lease on old giveaways, which will cost that additional $37 trillion. And then saying, don't worry, honey, it won't cost a dime. Are the American people so out of touch that they can't detect the lie in that? I don't think so. And are my Republican colleagues so out of touch that they really want to try to deceive the American people in this manner? I don't think so. So colleagues across the aisle, let's have integrity in what this plan will do, and at least be honest about what we tell the American people. American people don't want the smoke and mirrors. They don't want the magic math gimmick. They want honesty about what this bill will do and what it will cost. What it will cost in terms of programs, what it will cost in terms of changes in tax law. You know, folks back home, they say billionaires, they can take care of themselves. Just what they earn on their existing investments is enough to float a family on a yacht for the rest of eternity. Why are we doing a bill that takes away from core health care, housing, and education programs for families to add more wealth to the billionaires? With this one bill alone, Republicans are giving $22 trillion to the wealthiest 10% of Americans, while the bottom 10% get enough to buy a cup of coffee. Here's a cup of coffee. Well, no coffee in it. But think of this as a cup of coffee. Now, does the Republican plan for that bottom 40%, does it pay for a cup of coffee a day? No. A cup of coffee a week? No. A cup of coffee a month? No. You get 1 cup of coffee for the entire year, $6. That's the estimate of what the bottom 40% get with the Republican plan. 1 cup of coffee for the entire year. So to the 40% of Americans who are striving to get on their feet, this is what the Republican proposal is for you, while they're giving the top 0.1% over $300,000 a year a person, they're giving you 1 cup of coffee. Don't drink it all in one place. Take a little sip each day of the year, because that's all you get. Our plan is different. Democrats are fighting for families. We're fighting for health care, for Medicaid. We're fighting for health care because it is a foundation on which families thrive. We're fighting for education because it's a foundation on which families thrive. We're fighting for housing, affordable housing, because it's a foundation for families to thrive. That's the plan. Families thrive, and billionaires pay their fair share in taxes. How did we get to this point? Let's turn the clock back to 1974. Let's go through a little time machine back to 1974. At that point, Democrats and Republicans came together and established a new budget process called the Budget Impoundment Control Act because they were so concerned about deficits and concerned about President Nixon impounding funds. So they said we have to rectify these soaring deficits. And so they said 3 things, 3 pillars. Well, first we'll create a fast track, a filibuster-free pathway to reduce deficits. And even Robert Byrd of West Virginia, the national defender of the filibuster, agreed. All 100 senators voted for this bill. One purpose, decrease deficits. And that plan had these 3 pillars. First, deficit reduction in the first 10 years. That was the core goal. Second of all, no increase, no provision can create an increase in a deficit in any given year after the first 10 years. And third, we're going to use honest numbers. No more smoke and mirrors, no more gimmicks, no more trying to deceive the public saying we have a responsible plan when it's creating massive additional debt. Well, that plan, that 1974 plan, that worked for 22 years. And then along comes 1996. And in 1996, my Republican colleagues wanted to do a tax plan that involved huge giveaways to the wealthiest Americans, and they said, but we can't get 60 votes, we need Democratic help, we can't get that to the floor. And they said, okay, let's do a nuclear option. Let's reinterpret that first pillar, must reduce deficits in the first 10 years, and say it can increase deficits. This very chamber, right here, it happened. The former Republican leader, Robert Dole, appointed his staff member, Robert Dove, to be parliamentarian, and they reversed the plain language of the law in order to blow up deficits with tax giveaways to the wealthy. Now, it turned out this year they didn't end up using that nuclear provision because they struck a different deal with President Clinton. But they did use it in 2001 and 2003. They did use it in 2017, all for massive tax cuts, the majority going to the richest Americans. So this plan, this Republican plan, it isn't new. This plan has been the core strategy since 1996. Run up debt and give massive amounts of money to the richest Americans. It is very disturbing to me, very disturbing to every American who sees that all we're doing under the Republican vision is increasing wealth inequality, undermining the programs for families to stand on, to thrive, and proceeding to enrich the richest people in our nation. You know, back in 1974, when Democrats and Republicans together crafted this plan, the debt to GDP ratio was 23%. Today, it's 100%. Our national debt is equal or slightly above our national gross domestic product. In 1974, the annual deficit was $6 billion. Today, it's about $2 trillion. In 1974, the total national debt was $475 billion. Seemed like a lot at the time. Now it's 37, or just shy of $37 trillion. But while running on fiscal responsibility since 1996, the Republican Party has been the party of fiscal irresponsibility, changing the Senate rules to run up deficits and debt, giving away the Treasury to the richest Americans, and imposing that massive debt on the families in the future. It's hard to get your hands around what their $37 trillion debt plan means, but think about it like this. Since Independence Day, July 4th, 1776, we've run up less than $37 trillion in debt, and they want to add $37 trillion or more in debt with this single bill. Wow, that's something. You know, candidate Trump said he'd be a champion for families, but President Trump is a champion for billionaires. This is the great betrayal. In February, Democrats voted for amendment after amendment to help families, and my colleagues across the aisle voted almost in every case unanimously against those amendments to help families. Democrats voted for an amendment to make sure Medicaid was protected. Republicans voted against it. Democrats voted for an amendment to lower the cost of groceries. Republicans voted against it. Democrats voted to lower the cost of housing, and Republicans voted against it. Democrats voted to lower the cost of prescription drugs. Republicans voted against it. Democrats voted to lower the cost of health insurance. Republicans voted against it. Democrats put forward amendments for families to thrive and for the rich to pay their fair share of taxes. And Republicans voted against it because that's not their plan. Hasn't been their plan since 1996. Their plan has been families lose and billionaires win. If this budget proposal, this vision for the reconciliation bill that will be subsequently crafted doesn't help families, who does it help? Well, let's look at who was lined up behind Trump at his inaugural address, just down the hall, done inside because the weather was so cold. Well, who did we have? We had Mark Zuckerberg standing behind the president, billionaire Meta, who owns Facebook, who gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. We had Jeff Bezos, billionaire of Amazon, who gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. We had Sundar Pichai, the billionaire of Alphabet, which owns Google, who gave $1 million to Trump's inauguration fund. Billionaires lined up behind him, but not just those three, also the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of Tesla and SpaceX and Starlink, and now, infamously, the name behind Doge, who spent more than $250 million to elect Trump and my Republican colleagues. And those are just the contributions we know about. We don't know about all the dark money they may have spent. Slashing programs families rely on to give trillions of dollars to the richest Americans. That's the Republican plan. Billionaires who don't care if we slash Medicaid. They don't care if grocery prices go up. They don't care about the cost of housing or prescription drug prices or health insurance because they're billionaires. What costs to us a month's salary for them is a 1-second blip in their financial landscape. You know, Donald Trump said about the 25% tariffs on cars, I couldn't care less. I couldn't care less if automakers raise their prices. Well, you know who does care? American families. American families care because a car is a significant part of their budget, and they do care about the health insurance, they care about the groceries, they care about the rent, or the interest rate that drives their mortgage. You know, there aren't so many billionaires in America. What is the point to help a very small group of the richest get even richer? Well, that's a longer story about how money pollutes our political process. But here on the floor, where we can argue the pros and cons of policies, let's at least use honest numbers, not replace the CBO numbers with some fake numbers, not use magic math. We are here, Democrats on the floor, to expose this fraud. We are here to stop this fraud. We are here to fight for America's families. We are here to stop this budget resolution and the subsequent reconciliation bill in which families lose and billionaires win, because we want families to thrive and billionaires to pay their fair share. Thank you, Mr. President.